The prisoners themselves called this camp nothing else than Hell in Hell. During its existence, about 335,000 prisoners passed through Mauthausen, of which more than 122,000 died or were executed. The camp was established in 1938 and was part of the Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp system, which had a total of 49 branches. At the same time, the concentration camp was the most profitable among all the concentration camps. The fact is that prisoners, as a rule, were used to work in quarries, where granite was mined. The first prisoners were criminals, and later the camp began to be filled with citizens from all over Europe, and after the German attack on the Soviet Union, also with Soviet prisoners of war. The basic rule of the camp was, in a nutshell, killing by labor. The prisoners worked from 4 o'clock in the morning until late in the evening. Those who were so weak were executed. At the same time, if the killed or deceased prisoner was a citizen of Germany or was a resident of, for example, Poland, France, Belgium, etc., then even on his death, the camp administration managed to earn money. Relatives of the deceased were notified. Your son, husband, or father was ill, was in the hospital, and received all kinds of medical assistance. But unfortunately, this assistance did not help, and he died. We express our sincere condolences to you. If you pay 0.72 marks, you can get a certificate of his death. The granite mined by the prisoners was originally used to rebuild the city of Linz, which Hitler saw in his plans as completely reconstructed and transformed. A lot of stone was required, so a labor force in the camp quickly failed. According to the memoirs, even the Germans themselves who lived near the camp called this place Mauthausen, house of murder or house of death. The working day of the prisoners looked as follows. Under guard with dogs, they were taken to the quarry, and then the work was distributed. One group chipped off the rock with picks, the other loaded it onto the stretcher, and lining up in a circle formed the so-called living conveyor, which delivered the rocks to the place of unloading. If someone could not carry a stretcher and stopped, then he instantly received a shot in the back. Some guards did it even without weapons. They simply approached a weakened prisoner and smashed his head with a pickaxe or stone. As one survivor recalled, on the first day, we brought 12 bodies from the quarry. We piled them near a huge basement. From there, they went to the crematorium. But even such conditions were still relatively tolerable. Those who for some faults fell into the so-called penalized no longer had even the slightest chance to survive. The work of the penalized was to lift the broken stones up to the stairs of the warehouse, nicknamed by the prisoners the Stairs of Death. The exhausted prisoner had to overcome 186 steps. Stepping aside from the ladder was considered an escape attempt, followed immediately by a gunshot. Those who no longer had the strength to stand up were taken aside, where the unfortunate were executed. Some prisoners even walked to the place of execution instead of the stairs. In 1941, Mauthausen received the highest category for prisoners according to the status of its regime. The so-called incorrigible enemies of the Reich, those who attempted to escape, participants in the anti-fascist resistance, and partisans were sent there. In addition to exhausting labor, prisoners were constantly beaten, abused, tortured, and executed for no reason. The life of any of the prisoners was worth nothing. He could have been killed at any moment, either by a guard or even by a prisoner working for the administration. At the same time, the weak and sick who survived one day, as a rule, did not live to the next. Those who from exhaustion or illness could not walk were taken out alive to the crematorium. As one former prisoner recalled, twice a day, the SS came to the block and, despite the mud and snow, gave the command, "Lie down," and stomped on our bodies, hitting us with sticks and boots. The block chief would also join them. Then they lined us up, withdrew whoever they wanted, and then killed them. Those sick prisoners who could no longer walk but could still crawl were not taken by the SS to the crematorium, but left in order to finally torture the already almost half-dead people. After the morning formation, the crawlers had to go out for the so-called walk. Those who could not crawl to the exit from the barracks died either from blows with batons or an unfortunate prisoner was injected with poison. Lack of medical care, tiny food packages, constant beatings and exhausting labor, it would seem all this together was already the limit of what a person can survive. But in the camp there was also the so-called death block number 20, from which there was no way to get out alive. Mostly captured Soviet prisoners of war were kept there. However, representatives of other countries also got into the block, for example for violating the regime, insubordination, and simply because someone from the camp administration wanted it that way. The condition of life, if it could be called life, in the barracks of death were the worst that any normal person can even imagine. The prisoners were fed once every 3 days, or once a day, but the ration was 4 times less than in the rest of the camp. Moreover, the food was very salty, and of course the SS did not give any water. Vladimir Shepetya, one of the miraculously surviving prisoners of the barrack of the death, said after his release, "Once a day, half a bowl of beetroot soup and 100 grams of ersatz bread. On hot summer days, a lot of salt was added into the soup, and we were not allowed to drink. Dysentery, erysipelas, inflammation of the skin, and some kind of skin disease from which the whole body was in boils. The prisoners of the barracks became dummies for training inexperienced SS men and Hitler Youth fighters, who practiced skills and various techniques. The only thing from which the imprisonment of barracks number 20 was exempted was work. Instead, so-called training sessions were carried out daily. The prisoners were forced to run around the barracks, walked in a half-crouch, goose step, and crawl. In the barracks, the prisoners slept in the bare floor, which was specially watered in winter. There, the attitude toward prisoners was something beyond comprehension. For example, in winter, those who could not stand were put on a watered floor. Those who could not sit were carried out and thrown alive into the crematorium. A special type of bullying was the washroom installed in the center of the barracks. The procedure in the morning looked like this: quickly run up, rinse your face with water and also quickly run away. If a prisoner fumbled, he was beaten or killed. If he did not wash his face, he was also beaten or killed. Another so-called entertainment of the SS was the daily withdrawal of prisoners for execution. Whom such a fate could overtake, even the SS men themselves did not know. Therefore, there is nothing surprising in the fact that the mortality rate in the barracks, and indeed in the entire camp, exceeded all conceivable and unimaginable limits. The camp crematorium worked around the clock. One of the last heinous crimes committed on the eve of the liberation of the camp was the massacre of about 400 people, who were executed on February 18, 1945. On this day, completely naked prisoners were taken out into the cold and began to be watered from a hose. Those who tried to dodge the jets of water were beaten by the SS. Many fell dead after the first procedure. The most persistent lasted several procedures. All prisoners were actually frozen alive.